Both sides have a kernel of truth. Yes, the videos are being edited in the most unflattering way possible. And yes, when you see this happening again and again and again and again and again and again and again, and all the stumbles and all the gaffes, and you can go back from this guy who has been in public office for decades and decades, you can see the cognitive decline actually happening, and we shouldn't be forced to lie to ourselves. There are cheap fakes going around, not deep fakes. Deep fakes is when you take artificial intelligence and you have an image of someone or a video of someone, and then you can make it look like someone is actually there saying something that they're not. That's not what's going on. This is now cheap fakes. And specifically, it is about President Biden. And over the last couple of weeks, he has had a lot of moments that look to everyone with eyes and brains, looks a lot like someone who is just in their 80s and is slowing down, kind of freezing. My grandmother went through dementia. I do know what this looks like. It'd be really hard for anyone to convince me that I'm not seeing what I'm seeing. But the White House is officially calling all of these videos that are being clipped and spread around conservative media, they're calling them cheap fakes. In other words, you're not really seeing what you think you're seeing. Let's take a look.
Why? The video went viral faster than usual. President Biden at the G7 summit in Italy, surrounded by world leaders, appearing to wander off before being pulled back to the group by the Italian prime minister. In reality, another camera angle showed the president was actually trying to greet skydivers who just finished a demonstration. But the Republican National Committee and conservative media quickly amplified the first angle, falsely claiming the president was meandering. The Biden campaign is calling it a, quote, cheap fake. What is a cheap fake?
Cheap fakes are these deceptively edited videos, and they're a huge part of Donald Trump's campaign strategy.
Rob Flaherty is Biden's deputy campaign manager, who's overseeing the escalating digital war and slamming the Trump campaign, saying it's increasingly taking videos out of context.
We have to be more aggressive about monitoring, about intervening, about taking action against it, because it is just going to be such a centerpiece of how he's communicating.
That G7 video is among a string of clips that some Republicans say raises concerns about President Biden's age and abilities. Tonight, the Trump campaign is arguing there's nothing wrong with highlighting videos that are not digitally altered, like this clip of President Biden standing still for several seconds on stage at a Hollywood fundraiser until former President Obama leads him off stage, and another where he also stood still as people danced around him during a Juneteenth celebration. The White House says the president did not freeze in these incidents, but was enjoying the moments. Tonight, the Trump team telling us
the Biden campaign is trying to convince the American public not to believe their own eyes. We are.
Okay, so odds are you've seen at least some of these clips. There have been a lot. And throughout the tenure of Biden's almost 4 years in the White House, they are starting to come more and more frequently, which would give some kind of evidence of cognitive decline. And you can listen to him give a speech 8 years ago, 16 years ago. The guy's been in public office for 40 or 50 years. You can go 40 years ago, and you just see that at some point he starts slowing down. And that's what happens.
Wow.
We're all going to get old, and we're all going to slow down. And I know, some 95-year-old who still runs like triathlons or whatever. And that's awesome. But for most of us, we're good. And then we're good. And we're in our 60s and we're good. And then we're in our 70s and we're good. And then we're in our mid 70s and we're good. And then all of a sudden, we slow down. It's what happens, and you should take care of yourself, and you should really take care of your diet, and you should exercise vigorously. You should keep your mind sharp and prolong as long as possible. But we all die someday. Before we die, we start slowing down, That's unfortunately what's happening. And so in a real sense, what the Democrats and the White House are arguing is that these clips are being selectively edited in order to make the president look just as bad as possible. And when they say that, most of the time, they are absolutely right. They are right about that. Probably the most egregious form of this was on D-Day a couple of weeks ago. People edited a clip where it looked like, and everyone said, it looked like Biden was kind of crouching down in a position that a toddler would take when they are taking a number 2 in their pants, right? So,
wow.
Everyone put that out. And the clip they released did actually look like that. And it was very misleading, because if you just played even 5 more seconds, what you would see is that he was thinking he was supposed to sit down. There's a chair behind him that we couldn't see in the video. And so he crouched almost down and then paused and looked around like, guys, are we sitting down or are we not sitting down? Right? I've done this before. Like the one time I went to Catholic mass and you just like sit, stand, sit, stand, sit, stand, sit, stand, sit, stand, sit, stand, sit, stand. I never knew when to sit, right? So every once in a while I'd like quarter sit and then just wait. And I'll tell you, this was definitely not pooping my pants.
Wow.
Was just seeing if it was time to sit or not. And so they're right that people are taking the most unflattering angles, that people are cutting the clips off a little early if it looks better for the Trump campaign. That's absolutely happening. At the same time, our eyes are not wrong. He is freezing up. He is wandering off. And they can say, oh, well, he was wandering off to talk to the parachutists. But another world leader had to go over and grab him by the arm, like you would a grandparent who is cognitively declining, and lead him back over to where he's supposed to be. Jill has to do this all the time. So this is happening. Whether we want to admit it, whether we like it or not, that's happening. And both sides have a kernel of truth. Yes, the videos are being edited in the most unflattering way possible. And yes, when you see this happening again and again and again and again and again and again and again, and all the stumbles and all the gaffes, and you can go back from this guy who has been in public office for decades and decades, you can see the cognitive decline actually happening, and we shouldn't be forced to lie to ourselves. At the same time, we should not have to cut these clips to make a guy who's just deciding whether we're sitting down or not to look like he is defecating on himself, okay? What would happen if we lived in a world, and I know it's like utopian thinking, where we just told the truth and we had an expectation of people to tell the truth? Because at the same time now, the left is looking at Trump and starting to selectively edit clips and say, oh yeah, you think our guy is going senile? I think your guy is going senile.
Wow.
It's like the worst rap beef of all time. No, you're super old. No, you're super old. No, you're, have dementia. No, you have senility. It's like, golly, how are we even in this position in the first place? Like, these are our two best candidates. I see a similar thing happening on the right, where Donald Trump has a lot of baggage, and there are a lot of character qualities that are not great. And every time he is asked to define like his faith in Jesus, his answer makes it very clear he does not understand the gospel and doesn't think his sins need to be forgiven, right? So we have people on the right, tons of people who like swear not only that he's a Christian, but that he is some kind of messianic figure sent by God to save the republic. And so it's like, that's also not true though, right? So we have both sides selectively editing, both sides taking things out of context. You have the left when Donald Trump says there's going to be an economic bloodbath if I'm not elected. And for months now, they have said, Trump says there will be a bloodbath, as if there's going to be violence in the streets or something. Everyone does this. And one of the reasons is because our culture punishes transparency from our politicians. No one is allowed to admit anything. Trump is not allowed to admit his shortcomings. Joe Biden is not allowed to admit that he's losing a step. And so we have everyone telling little pieces of truth with an overarching amount of falsehood. In Ephesians 4, Paul writes and says, therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another. What if we really saw ourselves as one country and our elected representatives as the people who are supposed to represent us? We're all a part and they represent. And so we put away falsehood so we know what's really going on. In Proverbs 19, it says, a false witness will not go unpunished, and he who breathes out lies will perish. See, as long as we live in a culture that punishes transparency, we will continue to have leaders who obfuscate the truth. And we should desire transparency in our leaders. And if no one else will do it, if you are a follower of Jesus, you should do it. If you're a follower of Jesus and you're convinced that Trump is the best option in 2024, then vote your conscience. But you should be honest about his shortcomings. It's funny because, I'm just trying to look at current events and take like a biblical approach to them. And I just end up making everybody mad because I'll talk about how absolutely embarrassing it is to have a potential president on trial because while he was married and his wife was pregnant, he was having an affair with an adult film star. That's embarrassing. And we should be able to say that that's embarrassing. If you think Joe Biden is the best option for the country and you think he can last another 4 years, you should just be honest about what we can all see, that he is going senile. And there is power in transparency. And as Christians, we are called to that transparency. The Apostle Paul was a great representation of this, like in 2 Corinthians 12, where he says, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses so that the power of Christ may rest upon me. He's like, I've got a lot of things I could brag about. I'm going to brag about my weaknesses. I'm going to tell you I'm the chief of all sinners. I'm going to 8 Mile myself. Remember at the end of 8 Mile where B Rabbit, Eminem goes on stage, and instead of dissing the other guy, he just puts all his dirty laundry out on Front Street. And it's like, I mean, how are you even going to diss me now? I just told you everything about me. I just like emptied all the skeletons out of the closet. Wouldn't it be wonderful if someday we could create a culture where that is what is expected? You can't even think about running for president unless you're going to put all your dirty laundry on Front Street for everybody. This is exactly who I am. This is exactly what I've done. This is exactly what I've gone through. And as we're going to see in the next clip, when you're not willing to do that, it can have absolutely dire consequences. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you are subscribed so you can stay up to date with all new content. And if you want early access, exclusive content, and monthly live Q&As, make sure to check out patreon.com/ClaytonTime.